Kevin Hassett, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here, Sean.
Okay, so just for everybody who, maybe the two people who didn't see what happened yesterday, walk us through what happened yesterday and where we are now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really great to be back with you, Sean, and to be back here in the White House. Without you, I just miss you. We got to get you back. So I think that what happened, really not just yesterday, is that the president decided that he was going to charge tariffs on countries that were equal to either their tariffs or their non-tariff barriers, so that we would basically be treating them like they treat us. And of course, they've been mistreating American workers for a long, long time. After he made that announcement, then countries from all over the world, more than 70 countries, called us up and said, look, we got to talk. We got to talk. And up to 10 or 15 countries even made specific offers of, hey, we'll do this. We'll treat you better in the future if you reduce your tariffs. And basically, at some point, that the momentum from all of the positive negotiating action that we were doing reached such a height that the day before yesterday, everybody was talking about, well, so how should we go from here to the next step so that markets understand how successful President Trump's policies are? And we were talking about, well, maybe we should close a couple of the offered deals and announce them as like early signs of how successful this approach is. Or maybe we should pause the really high tariffs because there's so many people making progress. And in the end, we decided yesterday to do the pause. And of course, that's when markets that didn't really, I think maybe hadn't priced in the fact that we're really serious about making America great again and getting the trade deals to work, that they celebrated like never before as one of the best stock market days in history, because they could see that President Trump's policies were going to be a big success.
Yeah, I finally was able to look at my 401k again. I will tell you, I was searching for a meeting yesterday and I came across a quote that I thought was interesting. It said, if I was having some trouble closing a real estate deal, I would sue the guy. If he didn't give me what I wanted, a threat to sue would have no effect. But if I sued him the day before closing and then offered to withdraw the lawsuit as part of the deal, they almost always signed. They knew you meant it. Have you heard that before?
Boy, have I heard that before. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. This is what you wrote in the drift that Donald Trump had talked to you about.
He told me that you can't threaten to do something if you need to get concessions. You know,
so was this another example of that? Was that him saying, hey, I got to go through with this so that they think I'm serious?
Yeah, I think that, but not only that, but he is serious. It's like, okay, guys, look, if you don't fix this, then here are the consequences. And people looked at the consequences, and again, the consequences were fair. The tariffs that he was supporting at the time were estimated as a best estimate of the total impact of their negative trade policies, which are hurting America. And so when they look at it, they say, well, that's a really high tariff. Well, it's just what you're doing to us. Americans didn't get mad at the president because they said, oh, we're just treating them the way they're treating us. And so he kind of won it in so many dimensions that it really is something that in the next gold-plated edition of Art of the Deal, they should add a chapter on his.
Are you convinced though that these other countries are now equally committed to getting a deal, or are they going to say, "Gosh, maybe we interpret this as him backing down," or are they like, "We got it. We need to cut a deal so that 90 days or 89 days from now, I guess, that this doesn't happen again"?
Well, I can tell you that I'm highly confident that 15 to 20 countries will have really good deals in a relatively short time. And the countries that don't have the deals after they see that are probably going to wonder, oh, geez, look at how good it is for these guys. Why am I not talking to the president? And so my guess is the sort of allies and friends and so on, we're already, I had a call with the president and the president of Switzerland already, and Japan and South Korea are fast forwarding towards us. So there's just a whole bunch of stuff that's really important that's moving forward, and even the EU, I could say.
There were some reports that the bond market really, not just reports. The president said people were getting the jitters. Explain to people what that did to the thinking and the calculus.
Well, what happened was that because the very high tariff on China went on, then there was a risk, actually somewhat realized, from bond market participants in their minds that China was going to start selling all the US treasuries that they own, and that could be disruptive for markets. And so there was a moment yesterday where bond markets were sort of puzzled about how bad could it be if China starts really piling in and selling bonds, which would, of course, drive down their price and drive up the interest rate. And so you saw a spike in interest rates that was pretty large by historical standards. But then beginning at 12:45, we had a treasury auction where the new stuff that the treasury has to issue is sold. And in that treasury auction, it was a phenomenally successful auction. And a lot of people recognized that the market had sort of given them a profit opportunity by buying low or at high interest rates, but low prices. And the auction was incredibly successful. And that happened just before the close of the Twitter or the Truth Social message that said we're going to pause the tariffs. And so there were really two big positive developments as far as markets are concerned. The fact that the Treasury auction was so successful, and so the Chinese weren't really able to disrupt the US Treasury market. And second, that we then paused the tariffs. And between the two, it was, off to the races in terms of how good it was in equity markets, especially.
So, Kevin, let's talk about China for a second. Obviously, that's the big isolating factor now, right? We put a lot more tariffs on them. They tariffed us back. What's the play, right? Is it we want to negotiate one-on-one with them and take down the tariff and non-tariff barriers? Like, what is it? What does that negotiation look like with China in itself?
That's something that the president's going to decide. And the president has made it clear that he has high regard for President Xi. He thinks that they work well together. And at some point, I would expect that the two of them will have a conversation about this. But as of now, there's no schedule.
That's here. You don't have to cut. My prediction is a big meeting in Beijing in July, but that's my take. Okay. But what does this mean in the short term for consumers? What does this mean right now if I'm buying stuff and I'm a small business owner and I'm reliant on some kind of products from them? Listen, and just to be clear, I'm glad the president's standing up to China. I believe it is an existential threat to us militarily, economically. We need to deal with this. But if you are a U.S. consumer or business owner right now, what does it look like for the next 30, 60 days?
One of the things that I think that you could dig into, if you haven't already planned to do it at a later part of the show, is today's announcement on the Consumer Price Index. Because we got an announcement on what's happening in consumer inflation that's showing that the president's economic policies are again like hitting it like really out of the park. And so we had a decline in consumer prices. We had the biggest decline in drug prices that we've seen just about ever. Energy prices are way down. And so inflation is really at its best level now since really the very, very beginning of the Biden administration. I think the last time inflation was this good was the March before all of that crazy spending happened that set inflation into a disaster. And so inflation is way down because of the economic policies of the president. So the deregulation is making it easier for people to do stuff with lower costs. The fact that we've been cutting spending through DOGE, that we've made it clear with the reconciliation package, which, again, the budget instructions passed the House today, that we made it clear that we're not going to be that runaway inflation government that looks like Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden. We're going to be supply siders that increase the supply of stuff so prices go down. And I think that one of the things that's happening that we can see with the trade uncertainty over the last few months is that everybody is rushing to produce more stuff into the U.S. And the increase in production in the U.S. has been so striking that even with the tariffs that were put in place, some of them ahead of this report, inflation went down. Right. It's really quite remarkable.
So there's things though that what I think a lot of people say to me is, hey, I support the president. I get that he's standing up for us. We've had unfair trade practices and that China presents a threat, but there's certain things that we don't make in America, or that, like I'll give you an example, like potash fertilizer. Like you can't make it here. It's made in Canada. Like how do we adjust for supply chain issues that we do or don't make in America?
Well, the U.S. Trade Representative has an annex of things that we don't make in America or can't grow in America that are excluded from the tariffs. And so I think that we'd have to go thing by thing to see, is this a thing that qualifies as something that's not tariffed? But yes, there's a very, very long list of things that we just have to import that are excluded from the tariffs already.
All right. The only thing I wanted to cover with you is pharmaceuticals. The president went after pharmaceuticals. And again, I agree. Post-COVID, the idea that we had to look back at China for a lot of our stuff. But the reports that I read, and I'm not an expert on this, which is why I wanted to ask you, is a lot of medicines are generic and there's not a huge profit margin. So what's the thinking behind tariffing pharmaceuticals, and how will that impact us?
Well, again, right now, pharmaceuticals are excluded from the reciprocal tariffs, and even the paused reciprocal tariffs, are at 10%, but don't apply to pharmaceuticals. And so, in the fullness of time, the president believes that we need to, for national security reasons, make sure that we have a good, solid supply of pharmaceuticals here in the U.S., so that if a foreign adversary were to decide to withhold medicines, that it wouldn't cost American lives. And so we've got a long-run policy of trying to onshore pharmaceutical production, and we've been doing it, basically through deregulatory efforts that have been attracting capital. You saw that we just had this announcement of a big new plant from Eli Lilly, but we're also considering future tariffs, and we'll, study them and make sure that they don't happen in a disruptive way. But we do need to, as a national security matter, get pharmaceutical production to happen more onshore.
All right, Kevin, last question for you. For the average American who doesn't follow the ups and downs of the market right now and says, okay, in a nutshell, just tell me, 30 seconds, what did we get this week as a country? Why are we better off than we were on Monday here now towards the end of the week?
We're way better off right now than we were on the 20th of January, all the way through. And forget about the chatter that, on the news outlets that are, way less responsible than you are, Sean. Let's look at the economic data. We've had 2 magnificent jobs reports. The jobs reports were incredible. 10,000 automobile jobs, a big increase in manufacturing jobs, big increase in every kind of job. The market thought there'd be about 150,000 jobs created. It was almost 230,000 in the last jobs report. And then what happens is they have this old thing called the Phillips curve, right, where it says that if you have job growth, then that causes inflation. And so while we've got this amazing job growth from President Trump's policy, we got a big reduction in inflation. So this is exactly what happens when the supply side works, right? And so we've got people going back to work, increasing the supply of labor, increasing the supply of products. We've got firms, bringing trillions of dollars of investment back into the U.S. That increases the supply of stuff. And when you increase the supply of stuff, so suppose you got an apple tree and then you get another apple tree. And so now you've got an apple farm with 2 apple trees. Well, when you go to the market, you got a lot more apples, but you're going to have to lower the price if you want to sell all the apples. And that's what's going on. We got a lot more apples and people are lowering the prices.
A lot more apples. Kevin Hassett, Director of the National Economic Council. Appreciate you being with us. And again, it was nice to have your book, The Drift, so I could get a little bit of insight into the thinking here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.